Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today I'm super excited to be in conversation with my next guest, the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Offbeat magazine, which is a major voice in the music scene and cultural scene of Louisiana and New Orleans. Please welcome Jan Ramsey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to meet you.
Thrilled to have you on. So I want to start off with one of these sort of like introductory questions. I find like, because I've been revisiting it through these interviews with folks, discovering like, wow, I really was into interviewing and talking with people when I was really young. And so for you, could you tell us about some of the things that you were into creatively when you were a younger person and how maybe that has like presented itself in your work these days and your work over the last like period with the magazine?
Well, from the time I was a little kid, I was really into music. I mean, I always loved music. And, I'm one of those kids that grew up with the Beatles and stuff like that. But I remember my dad used to bring home records for me because he knew how much I liked music. And I would listen to him constantly. I had a little record player, which is, now everybody is back to listening to vinyl again, but this was the original vinyl. But I always loved music. I used to play guitar. I was a band nerd because I loved music, all different kinds of music. And I think that was something that was given to me by my parents and my grandfather who lived with us. He had a homemade hi-fi, and they used to play hi-fi. Do people even know what a hi-fi is anymore? It was, a homemade hi-fi system. And he used to play everything from opera to music, Broadway shows. And so I listened to a bunch of different stuff. And then back then, also the radio scenario was a lot different because they used to play a lot of local New Orleans R&B on the radio. Back then, it was first AM and then FM as time went on. But AM, I remember my dad gave me a little radio, a transistor radio that didn't need batteries. You'd take an alligator clip and stick it on a metal thing, and it would, you could hear it. But I would stay awake at night listening to the radio stations all night to myself in bed, and it would play stuff like Fats Domino and Irma Thomas and Tommy Ridgely and all these R&B people. So I loved all that music. Yeah. So I was a music freak, and then I was a big reader. Loved to read, always have, and I was an art major in school. So my mom used to tell me stuff like, boy, you landed in exactly the right situation job-wise, because I love music. I love to write. I love art and photography, and I like creative people. So, how lucky am I to be doing this for a living? It's fantastic.
That is fantastic. And, and thank you for walking us through that a little bit. I mean, I'm feeling like a kindred spirit kind of right here of like just being invested in the culture of where you're from and taking like something that you're really into and kind of shifting into like a pursuit to a practice that you've been doing for a while, like in the magazine. So if you will, could you tell us like how having this interest in listening to, music in different ways and having an interest in the culture and being a musician in your own right led to like Offbeat magazine? Like how did it start and what was the goal once you started rather?
Well, I had a job. I had a real job before I did the magazine. And I worked of all things, I worked for a CPA firm and traveled a bit because I was a consultant. And the company that I worked for at the time was based in New Orleans, but we worked all over the country. And I asked my boss, how come we don't have a lot of clients in New Orleans? Because I traveled all the time. I would, went to, mostly the Southeast, but on occasion to California. I've been to Baltimore. There are a lot of places that I've been. And I just thought after I started, I got involved with the Chamber of Commerce of all things. And I felt like I wanted to do some work for my company to try to do business development, stuff like that. Well, in working at the in this committee at the Chamber of Commerce, it was economic development subcommittee or something. And right about that time, I met a guy who was an attorney, probably the only music attorney in town that anybody knew of. And I had dinner with him one night, and it was like a eureka moment. I thought, somebody has to do something with music here, because while we have all this beautiful talent and creativity, we don't have the ability, or we never had the ability to take it much outside of New Orleans and Louisiana. It was, we didn't have a music industry here. Okay. And I thought, well, since I have a business background and I have all this interest in music, maybe it would be good for me to get involved in music industry development. So that's kind of where the idea from Offbeat started. But at that time, there was another magazine that existed, a music magazine, that really was more, it was almost like a fanzine. Not a lot of people knew about it. And I, being an ambitious, and again, I was, this is almost 40 years ago, so I was younger and I had a lot more energy than I have now. But I thought, if we take this music and take this information on where people can find music when they come to visit, because we have a strong hospitality industry, then that will be great for the music economy, for the clubs, for the musicians. And of course, we had Jazz Fest. And I could see, as a business person, I could see the appeal that the Jazz Fest had for people from outside of this area. And back then, it was a lot smaller than it is now. And I thought, there's really something here that the business community and the hospitality industry is not tapping into. Okay. So I was going to buy this other magazine. What happened is I got involved in this. I started this nonprofit music industry development thing called the New Orleans Music and Entertainment Association. And I was the first president of that. And then I backed off a little bit because a lot of the music people were, what should I say, annoyed that somebody like me, who was not, one of a musician, or had a background, was interested in doing this. And people, they do that sometimes, they get jealous or whatever, because I had the ability, because I actually wrote for a living. I used to write reports and stuff. And I think they were kind of jealous that I had managed to put music on the map in terms of a business, because I saw the fact that, nobody talks about music in terms of the economy and what it means to the city. So I thought, I got to get music on the radar of the business community, the government and, the businesses here, and listen, the hospitality industry, that is really going to do some stuff. And so that's what I tried to do. So I thought, if I buy this other magazine, she tried to sell it to me. I think it was in a bad financial situation. If I take this magazine, this media, and this is pre-internet, way pre-internet, the media has the ability to influence people and change their minds and put things, in front of them that they wouldn't necessarily be able to know about. So that's why I got into media, because I thought the media was the best way to do this. And that's where Offbeat started. And, it was a scenario where I distributed it in all the hotels, and nobody had done that before. And, when people are coming into town, because everybody thinks that New Orleans is a music town. Everybody comes from outside, to where's the jazz? They think jazz because that's what they hear. And but nobody was telling them where it was. And the concierges and the people in the hotels really didn't know. So the idea was to put Offbeat in all the hotels. So if somebody came up to, a front desk person or a concierge and said, well, I think I want to go listen to music tonight. What do I do? So the idea was say, okay, give them an Offbeat and then they can figure out where to go. So what we used to do is have, real extensive listings on where the music was and what kind of music and obviously what time and stuff like that. So that was kind of where it started in the hospitality industry. But then the magazine that I was going to buy that I didn't buy went out of business, and it was just us. And Offbeat evolved into more of a consumer magazine, not so much a business magazine. It was more consumer oriented. So I ran with that. And when I was doing it, I was still involved in trying to develop the music industry. And I was on the advisory board of the Louisiana Music Commission or something. And I said, one of the things that you guys really need to think about doing is doing a directory of resources. And that would include, the recording studios and the musicians and the bands and the attorneys and the radio stations and stuff like that. I said, you really need to do that. And because I knew Texas was doing it. And they said, no, we don't need to do that. We don't need that. And being the crazy entrepreneur and driven person that I was, I said, yeah, you need to do it. And if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it. So that's where the music directory started. And we did it for, 16 years. I quit doing it after Katrina. It got too hard. But I'm trying to revive it through the state. Because there's now another movement of trying to, develop the music industry. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Offbeat has lasted for so long. And when we have, and the magazine has made a name for itself, not just locally, but, throughout the world. I mean, we have subscribers all over the place, all over the world. So what I discovered, having been in the business for so long, is that the people who are from outside of this area know more about the music than the people who live here. Joe Blow doesn't, he doesn't know anything about the clubs in New Orleans because he doesn't listen to local music. He listens to commercial radio now. And of course, all of that changed drastically. But, it's like we need, the recognition for, the musicians here because, of course, again, I like creative people. I'm very inspired by creativity and especially by music. And, these people need to be appreciated. In some ways, I feel like I'm like beating my head against a brick wall because in America, and I'm not just talking about New Orleans, but in America overall, you don't have the respect for creative output and the artists that make the creative output that you do say in Europe. Okay. You don't have it. You don't have the support. And it's really, it bothers me a lot, because if people knew what it was like to live in a city that did not have what New Orleans and outside the city too, what we have here, it would be hard on them. But so many people have never lived anyplace else. And believe it or not, in New Orleans particularly, people don't leave. They stay here until they die, and they don't travel anyplace else. But they don't know what it's like to live in other cities. I do. I lived in other cities, so I know what it's like,
Well, one of the things, and I mean, what I'm hearing in there, I hear so many, I hear different versions of things that I've said and I've felt. My background was in business. I got a degree as a business admin, but on the analytics side, so business administration and bachelor's of science. And, as we were talking about a little bit before getting started, I think, having sort of this early interest, I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. And it was just like, my parents were like, I don't know if that's going to be the thing that pays the bills. So I went into business, but always had a desire and appreciation for art and creativity of all kinds. And I think it was for the best to have that background in business so I can strategically sort of funnel and think entrepreneurially. So like even coming here, I see ideas that I can nip, like even from a hotel standpoint, that could be done in different ways in different cities. For instance, having local artists and having them cycle out different parts of visual artists, different parts of the hotel. There are paintings there. Me as a person visiting, I'm now probably going to follow that artist to maybe talk with them for this podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
that sort of directory there, or even the people that I've interviewed in my podcast, building that out as a directory of well over 500 interviews, most of them focused in Baltimore, and kind of branching out in different cities now, but most focused in Baltimore. And that as the strategy to sort of this wild creative pursuit, but adding strategy from this entrepreneurial mindset and being able to provide that in an effort to, address something that,
Mm-hmm.
we see in different cities that, oh, well, this is the arts here. This is the culture here. And it's like, you're not talking to anyone that's in that place. You're not,
Mm-hmm.
it's changing because sometimes, there may be a fair amount of people that come into a city that relocate, they live there for a bit, and suddenly they fit the face. But it's like, you don't have the street cred. You haven't been here long enough. And, you haven't paid your dues in that way. And it's great to have new people coming in, but also let's give credit and preservation to the folks that have been doing it for a very long time in that place.
Oh, you have it. I mean, that's really a typical thing, because when I mentioned a few minutes ago about people are born here and they live here and they never move, they don't move to another city or something. Well, that is, New Orleans has always been a very, what I consider to be sort of a culturally inbred city. Okay. And even though we have people from outside coming in and who love the culture and love the music and love the food and love the art and the history and the architecture and stuff like that, they were still living someplace else. Okay, so the local people were the keepers and the progenitors of the culture. And what happened after Katrina made a huge change in the city. Okay, and the reason it did is because after Katrina, we had so many young people come here to help us rebuild, and they came from all over the country. They came here, they lived here for a while, and they got to say, wow, this is a pretty cool place. I'm moving. And then the other thing is that it got very expensive to live in places like New York, Brooklyn, Queens, wherever, and San Francisco, wherever. It got very expensive. And at that time, New Orleans became a cool, hip city for creatives who didn't necessarily want to spend $4,000 for an apartment because it was cheaper here, but it's not like that anymore. And the reason why is because a lot of these young people started moving to New Orleans in droves, and they brought in a new a sensibility for different kinds of music. They brought their culture or their likes with them, and so of course, if they interact with the people who make the culture, then you're going to get something different. They're going to take something from New Orleans and take what they like, and they're going to mix it up and make something different. But what you also find in New Orleans is a very, again, I said it was an inbred culturally. People, they are very skeptical about anybody who says anything about New Orleans who's not from here, you see, because it's like, what do you know? You're not from here, you're not even from here. I mean, our mayor is from California originally, and they're still talking about that, that she's from Compton or something. I don't know where she's from. She's from northern part of California, but she's not from here. And what does she know? That's the kind of mentality that you have from people, and you can't. I mean, I understand it, but you can't. You can't live by that and just dismiss people. You can't do that because it's counterproductive to a community and the culture. You want to retain and preserve the culture that you have, but you also want to leave it open to transmogrify and change and make something that is rooted in the tradition, but still is new. And a good example of that, I think, and this doesn't really have anything to do with, people who've moved here from out of town. It has to do with younger people and the fact that we have a very, very developed and strong hip hop, rap, and bounce. Bounces. Bounces. Okay. That's very strong here. And it's a much younger audience. And they are not getting the exposure that they want. They're getting out there, but they're not getting exposure from a mainstream audience. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I could tell you, but that would make the interview even longer. But that's an important thing. And I mean, this started happening years ago. I mean, there's a band called the Dirty Dozen Brass Band. Well, brass bands are their whole culture unto themselves. And the Dirty Dozen were and this is a long time ago, the Dirty Dozen were the first ones to not only take brass bands, but to tie it into bebop and to jazz. And then now there are bands that are more hip hop with, involved with funk, because we also have a big funk scene here, very, very big funk. And, it's all, moving and changing all the time. So you have to find a way to expose people to everything that we have. What I'm trying to do with now with Offbeat is I don't want us to be stuck into a situation where we're only covering what I call, legacy artists, which, by the way, are dying off. I mean, they're dying like crazy. The people get old and die. But to actually make sure that as the culture changes and the music changes, that those people are also getting exposure and they're listened to. I think it's really important, because I can pick up a newspaper or any other magazine or whatever. There's no real music magazines here except for Offbeat. We're still the only one that's really devoted to music and culture, but you don't get a lot of exposure for younger bands, in media. Of course, media is changing too. That's a whole other issue that you have to deal with. But it's a very to me, it's a challenge, and if you throw a challenge in front of me, then I'm going to try to solve the problem, because that's what interests me. It interests me to do that, to let people know what the depth and breadth of the musical culture is here. So it's interesting. And, there are a lot of musicians who, you could see generations of musicians that are in the same family. And a lot of families here are related. They're related to each other. That's very common here. Like the Andrews family, Trombone Shorty, he's got kids in his family. John Baptiste is from an extremely musical family. I mean, his dad and his uncles, and they were all in bands. They all learned from each other. And, that's a good example of two young kids, and not that young, in their 30s, early 30s. But that's a good example of them taking, what, their family, the traditions are, and taking it to another level, So that to me is fascinating and really part of what makes us unique here, that it continues to amaze me every day.
That is like, here's the thing, like you're giving me all the answers, so I love it. It's making my job so much easier over here. So thank you, and shout out to you. And like I said, I'm just hearing just a lot that connects on just how I go about things and things that I believe in from this vantage point. And I think, like, you know, I am hoping this is the beginning of several conversations in the future, because I'm learning a lot, and it's like, you know, sparking like just thoughts and ideas that I have with relation to, you know, arts and culture overall, and specific to my city. So in that, I have two last real questions, and then I have some rapid fire questions for you. So
Okay.
this first one, tell us about Mojo Mouth. I want to hear about that a little bit, and speak on it through, I guess, the lens of like the concept of truth. Like, I did this talk, right, a few months back, and I was talking about, like, the podcast is called The Truth in This Art. And people are like, so you're telling the truth, what it's about, and all of that. And I had these quotes, and one of them that popped up is, no one is more hated than the person that speaks the truth. And I had a story that connected to that. So I thought this would be a very apt question for you.
Well, you know, that Mojo Mouth thing started, golly, I don't know, back in the mid 90s or something, you know, because I never really did I never really wrote anything. And then I thought, well, you know, I have the ability to say what I think, as an editorial comment from me, you know, in the magazine. So I started, you know, there are things that were like pet ideas that I had. Obviously, I used to always talk about, you know, we don't have enough appreciation by the business, like I said, the business community, hospitality industry, the universities, whatever. We don't have enough appreciation for what music is. So I started off with that. And then it's like, you know, if I saw some things that I thought were, you know, unjust, then I thought, you know, I'll mention that. But I also have always been the kind of person that if I'm going to complain or bitch about something, I think that I should have the ability to, you know, I should make a suggestion, or, you know, let's make a suggestion for how we fix this, and not, I don't want to just bitch about it. You know, I want to say something that, you know, if you are, you know, if this is wrong, then why don't we do this? You know, why aren't we doing this? Now, whether or not it gets done or not, you know, is something else. But I feel like over the years that Mojo Mouth has said some things that have helped bring some things to fruition. And I can name a bunch of them. One of them is, we had no ability to educate people on the business of music here. So therefore, a lot of musicians got screwed around, which is not unusual for any, you know, if there are always a lot of musicians that, you know, get screwed, unfortunately. So now we have several programs on a university level and community college level that are teaching basic, you know, music business tenets. And of course, that's changed over the years too, you know. But we have there's a program at Dillard. There's a program at Loyola University. There's a jazz studies program at University of New Orleans, but it's not business oriented. I think they do teach some classes. We have the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, which is the creative arts high school. They teach that kind of stuff. We need an ongoing ability for the musicians to become educated on how they can take care of themselves, you know, and take care of their business, you know, because it's important. Because when you deal with music and, you know, and art, you know, you deal with intellectual property, and, you know, there's so many things that can go wrong. So now, you know, back in the time when I first got started, there was maybe, you know, one attorney, music attorney, and now there's, you know, buku attorneys, as they say. There's bunches of them. We have there's the economic development company. It's a nonprofit agency. It's a quasi public agency that's trying to get the music industry started here again. And they've discovered that there's such a thing as rights, sync rights, you know what sync rights. I know you know what sync rights are, but people who have written music, their music is not, you know, being promoted to entities, usually film, commercials, whatever, where they can get paid for the use of their music, because a lot of musicians don't think about that. They don't think about, I mean, I know people that have, that have make a living now doing that, um, so, I mean, and that's just part of the stuff that I learned as I've been doing this. I mean, there's so many things that have happened. The hospitality industry now started this thing called, it's called NOLA by NOLA, where they're promoting live music at the clubs, which they never did before. I mean, there's, things don't happen in New Orleans real fast. It takes a really long time. And sometimes I feel like, all the ideas and the stuff that I've been talking about in Mojo Mouth all these years, I just feel like nobody's listening. But, I'm the kind of person that thinks like, I want it and I want it now. It's gonna happen now.
Yeah, same.
But it doesn't work that way. It takes a long time for change to be made. And I can say, I think that since Offbeat has been around, there have been a big bunch of changes, and for the better, and I maybe I'm trying to, toot my own horn here, but I just think that, the fact that we've been around and been talking about it and, pushing and pushing, that, people are starting to pay attention, but it's still taking too long, Still tell you.
I feel you. Like, I get an idea and I'll pitch it. I'll write all of the stuff, taking that sort of business background. And it's like, this has to be structured in a real way. Let me make sure everything is signed and research and all of that. And sometimes I'll get like deaf ears, or people will get back to me a lot later. And I'm like, they don't have the vision. That's literally what I'll say. But I think there's a lot of ideas that are very sound, and it's things that it's just like, I think being an entrepreneur and having that mindset and that background from a strategic standpoint, you can kind of see like, here's the business case for this. This is why this will work, and having the know-how to kind of move things along. And then when you get caught by that sort of snail's pace, or that I have this idea that there are why people and how people. This is why we should do this. This is why we should work with the hospitality industry. This is why we should combine, our arts and culture with this industry. And a lot of people get caught up on the how part, and that just leads to procrastination and things ultimately not happening.
Yeah. Well, somebody has to be the person who puts it in place. I mean, we have an ongoing problem here. I'll give you another example. We have something called a noise ordinance. Okay. And the noise ordinance, and most cities have this, prevents you from playing music, at a certain level, blah, blah. Well, this is a big issue all around the city. It's particularly a big issue in the French Quarter, okay? Because people do live in the Quarter, okay? Not as many as there used to be, but there's still people do live in the Quarter. And there are a lot of venues, especially on Bourbon Street, that, they blast music out. I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole conversation in itself. But there's a noise ordinance, and the city even brought a guy in who was a specialist in noise abatement and measuring noise and blah blah blah. Okay, this is probably 10 years ago, and of course the guy did this massive study, and nobody's paying any attention to it. That's politics. Okay, but I thought, if the city found a way to give some kind of a tax break to the venues in the Quarter and elsewhere for people who installed noise abatement in their venues and kept the doors closed, then that would help out a lot. I mean, nothing has been done, but I can continue to say that kind of stuff. Because now we have the problem on Frenchman Street, which has become, Frenchman Street was not the way it is now. 10, 12 years ago, it was a place where all the locals went to hear music. They don't go anymore because it's turned into Bourbon Street. And I'll say it now, you can edit it out, but the way it was set up on Frenchman Street is that you could not have, unless you had your alcoholic beverage license, you cannot have music. You couldn't have amplified music. You couldn't have a stage. And there was only one permitted per block. And let me cut to the chase. Anyway, what the deal is, they were supposed to keep, the venues were supposed to keep their doors closed. Okay. And since we have no police here, they have not enforced that. We don't enforce the law. That's why New Orleans is known as the Big Easy.
I love it. Yeah.
Because people do stuff here, and it's sort of like, it's not hurting anybody else. I'll just turn the other way. You know what I mean? Okay. So it's better than starting a big fight or whatever, because they know how to control crowds here. I mean, look at Mardi Gras and all this stuff. But it's really difficult to enforce a noise abatement. And so what's happened on Frenchman Street is most of the venues now, when people used to go there, local people, they'd go to Frenchman Street, they'd go to the club, they'd pay a cover charge to get in, and they'd go listen to music. Now, because nobody enforces the law, it's turned into Bourbon Street, where people have their doors open and you can walk down the street and listen to music, which does two things. It devalues the music. It devalues the musicians. The musicians aren't getting paid a cover. And it's just encourages a street party instead of, the culture. You know what I mean? Even though, yeah, we have a culture of partying too, but I'm trying to look out for the musicians. You know what I mean? Yeah, and that's the same thing actually happened on Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street used to have, this a long time ago, but local people would go to Bourbon Street, they'd dress up, they'd pay a cover to go to Al Hurd's Club or Pete Fountain or whoever. And, as time went on, people came in, bought, the venue, didn't care whether or not there was music in it. And they just want to sell as much alcohol as they can. Well, that's kind of happening on Frenchman Street now, which bothers me all the time because it devalues the music. The musicians are not getting their due, and we don't have a union here. We don't, younger musicians don't even know what a musician, what the union was or what they did. And the musicians here are not going to, coalesce as a group to demand that they get respect. They don't do it. And that's sort of typical too, I mean, musicians want to play. They want to play. They want to get paid. And they don't care if they get how much they get paid. They just want to get paid something. I'd rather have them, get the cover than get a percentage of the bar. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's what kind of the stuff that Mojo Mouth talks about, because people don't think about that stuff and they need to think about it but the musicians are, they're a small group of people. But, it's like, hey, you want to find out what New Orleans is like without the musicians? Then all musicians need to not play anymore for a month and see what happens. That's going to happen. It ain't going to happen. I know this.
I love
know
that.
it. I mean, you got to be realistic too. So what do you do?
No, you're right.
Okay, so I can.
No. That was very insightful. Definitely gives me some context. In addition to it, I think this is going to start off the series of interviews. I think that's what it's going to be. This is a great one. So this is the last real question I have here before I get to those rapid fire ones. And the quick one, this question is this. I'm very intrigued by this concept of home. I think when we leave a place, we visit a place, we bring certain characteristics with us. And as I was touching on before we got started, two of the cities that I like, I see a lot of Baltimore in them, New Orleans and Philadelphia. I see a lot in Baltimore in them. So how do you carry, that sort of sense of home when you maybe explore a new place or travel to a new place?
Well, we're always looking to go experience music. We always are. And when my husband and I travel, we haven't traveled in a while, but it's really gratifying for us to go to places all around the world and find out that all you have to do is say New Orleans. Okay. And the music thing comes out, especially when people find out that my husband and I are both, into this music magazine. So I'm always looking for that kind of authentic experience, because that's one thing that you get in New Orleans. It's an authentically friendly place. It's an authentically music and cultural place. There's no BS, it's people here are very open about what they feel, what they think, they're very friendly people. I mean, and I kind of look for that, I guess, because of New Orleans, because that's how New Orleans, I look for that in other cities, and to tell you the truth, it's kind of hard to find, it is hard to find. But once you find it, it's fantastic. I can tell you this one story. I was in Atlanta. This is a really long time ago. And this is long ago, that there was of all things, an independent record label convention in town. So, that was a lot.
Yeah.
in Atlanta. And I wasn't even involved in any of this stuff. That's when I still had a job. And I went to a little club with this person that I was staying with, my friend, and we walked down to this club. I remember the name of it. It's called Blind Willie's. I don't know if it's still there. But I went into the club that night because a person who I knew was playing there. One of my favorite musicians was playing there, and there's a guy named Walter Wolfman Washington who just passed away a couple of weeks ago, of all things. But anyway, I go in, and it turns out that he was playing, and there were a bunch of people in that particular club that were in Atlanta, and they wanted to see Walter play, but they were from New Orleans. Okay. So Walter started to play, and in New Orleans, this is a dancing town. Very much dance is a very important thing. So I looked around as Walter was playing, and I noticed that all the people that were from New Orleans were shaking their ass. They were dancing. And the people who were from Atlanta were not. They were sitting in there, and music. It was great. And the people from New Orleans were like, oh yeah, it's a party. But that's how New Orleans is. That's what I kind of look for. When I go someplace else, it's just it's a feeling that and a mentality that you don't get in other places. I mean, I wish everybody could be like, everything could be like New Orleans, but then it wouldn't be New Orleans anymore either. So there's something unique that nobody else has, and music is a big part of that. Music is the biggest part of that, as far as I'm concerned. Music and the culture, because we have so many interesting things in our culture: the Mardi Gras Indians, the masking Indians, the social aid and pleasure clubs. I mean, there's just so many things that you don't find anyplace else.
Right. Thank you. That is great. I'm definitely gonna listen to this one a couple of times. That's really great.
Do you know what a social aid and pleasure club is?
I do not.
You know what a jazz funeral is?
I do.
You kind of do. Okay. Well, they call them second lines. So the social aid and pleasure clubs are very an interesting part of the culture in that, again, this is New Orleans is primarily a Black city, and there are a lot of people who are poor, are poverty stricken here. Mm-hmm. And what the social aid and pleasure clubs did was it was like a community or a neighborhood group of people who would pool their money to help their neighbors. If somebody was sick or somebody died or if somebody had an issue, they would pool their money. And then these social aid and pleasure clubs, which all have, crazy names, they also parade. They put costumes on and they parade. And it's not like a parade with floats, they dance. Go to YouTube and look up social aid and pleasure clubs or second lines and see what you see. Okay. And then we have, the Black masking Indians, and there's nothing like that anywhere in the city. I mean, in the country, right. Anywhere in the world that I can think of. The Black masking Indians, that's a whole other thing. In fact, I'm working on my issue for February, and we are putting on the cover a young man who goes by the name of Flag Boy Giz. and he's combining Mardi Gras Indian beats and music with hip hop, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how things change. And and he's a Mardi Gras Indian too. So that's another thing. Go to YouTube and look up Mardi Gras Indian and see what you see. It's just, you won't see it anywhere else.
You got it. So I want to move into the quick fire, and I'm going to mispronounce a word because I have trouble with some of these words. The lanyap portion of the podcast.
That's right. You said it right.
Oh, well, thank you. So these are just quick little asides or what have you. So the first one is, what musical landmark in New Orleans is a must see for visitors? Which one would you suggest for someone that's visiting for a weekend?
I would say, we do have a jazz museum in New Orleans Jazz Museum, which is located at the, it's in the Old Mint, 400 Esplanade, and they are constantly in the process of trying to create exhibits, that are relative to music. They have a lot of live music there. That's a good way to get introduced kind of to New Orleans music. There's another museum that's in the works, but that's a ways off. I'd say that would be a good place to start, but I would definitely try to go to Frenchmen Street because there's live music there, and most of it is, I would say, not cover bands. You get a lot of cover bands on Bourbon Street, but the people who are more into music are going to go to Frenchmen. Or another great thing, and this is not that difficult to find because we have so many festivals here. I mean, there's a festival for everything. There's a macaroni and cheese festival. There's a Bayou Boogaloo festival. There's the Jazz Fest, the French Quarter Fest. There are festivals all the time. Essence Fest. I mean, there are all kinds of festivals. And if you're going to come to New Orleans, check out ahead of time what festivals are going on. Yeah. Or go to, you can always go to Offbeat and check out who's playing.
I love that plug. I love that plug.
Yeah, go to our calendar and find out who's playing. Or, we get people that call us all the time and say, well, I'm going to be in New Orleans, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what's going on? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but because it's not like the clubs book months in advance. They don't do that. And because there's so many clubs here, we have so many music venues. They're everywhere. Go to Tipitina's. That's a great club. Go to Preservation Hall. Yeah. That's two different. Preservation Hall's in the quarter. Tipitina's is uptown, and they're both venues, but they're kind of totally different. But you can hear different kinds of music there. You can, I don't know. It's hard for me to say one place to go. It's hard. I mean, and I'll think of something too. I'm sure if we get off this call, like, oh damn, I should have said that.
No, but you've even given me a few places that are there that I got to check in these next few days. So thank you for that. So here I got two more for you. What did you have for breakfast?
I had Greek yogurt and granola and a cup of coffee, and I have that almost every day.
Okay.
And I had a cookie for lunch.
What kind of cookie? Chocolate chip?
No, it's some kind of almond thin cookie or something. Something that's not gonna have too much of a glucose problem. I don't. Got it. Because I just eat a little snack. Because if I don't eat a snack and my husband doesn't, if I won't eat the dinner that he cooks, he gets annoyed.
So this is the last one, and this is more of the tying everything sort of together. What's the piece of advice you would share being in with Offbeat magazine, being around for, over 3.5 going into 4 decades,
Yeah.
What piece of advice would you offer up to stay relevant and impactful in one's respective field based on like the work that you've been doing? How would you tell someone that wants to stay relevant and impactful in what they're doing?
Well, I would say definitely, if you have a business, you have to have the ability to recognize change and to adjust to change from a business standpoint. If you when there's a thing between being relevant and making money too. Obviously, if you're in business, you want to make money. But I think that you have to really not be afraid to change and to move in directions that you maybe didn't know that you would have to move into. I mean, I think that's a good business advice for anybody, and also to have a vision and stick to it. You still have an end vision, and you have to be able to, move toward that vision or that goal within the constraints of your current business situation and how other things can change change the way your business operates. You have to be very flexible. I think you have to be flexible and open to change. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
That's not specific to music, but it's just, from a business standpoint.
100%.
You have to be that way. So
that's pretty much it for the questions and the interview portion. But now it's time for that part where we wrap up with the shameless plugs. So one, I want to thank you for being a part of this podcast. It's been truly a pleasure. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to tell the listeners where they can check Offbeat out and all of that good stuff. The floor is yours. Website, social media, all of that good stuff.
Okay. Well, that's good. We are going to put out a 2023 Jazz Fest Bible, which we have done every year, that really just focuses on the Jazz Fest, since it is probably the most impactful festival that we have in terms of exposure to musicians to the outside world. Okay. I would encourage people to, you can order it online. It won't come out until right before Jazz Fest time. But we have now our website. You can subscribe to our website. It's $25.99 a year, basically. But we have 35 years of content online that you can go back through and check out. I mean, it's like the history of New Orleans music for the past 35 years, and probably even earlier than that, because a lot of the stuff that we wrote about is not necessarily had taken place in 35 years. We did a series on Louisiana Music Masters, which, covers all kinds of stuff. And we're always doing junk like that. We have a weekly newsletter that is free, and you can sign up on the website. It's called The Weekly Beat. Comes out every Thursday, where we, post news and stuff that's happening that you're probably not going to find anyplace else, because we're so focused on the music and culture of the city. And we have social media. It's all Offbeat Magazine, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Flickr. We have all that stuff. So, that would be my appreciate. I want people to, to understand what we're all about. We're into exposing and promoting local music and culture. That's what we do. That's my vision. That's what I do. I'm not interested in doing, interviews with, musicians who are playing here or, don't make their living in New Orleans. I mean, that's, or not just New Orleans, but Southwest Louisiana too, since that's kind of where we cover. So, at some point in time, I'd love to go back to doing a print magazine every month, but I don't know if it's going to happen. I just don't know.
Right.
It just, because the way, social media and the internet has impacted all print media in such, drastic ways that, I doubt seriously, unless somebody wants to, come help me and, be my sales rep and sell, $50,000 a month so we can print the magazine. I mean, printing has gone up. My print rates have doubled the printing cost. And not me, but everybody, all people who are in print are running into the same situation, So, but offbeat.com is the main thing in the Weekly Beat and the social media, and we do the Best of the Beat Awards. We just did them in November, which is an awards event for for the musicians here. We do it every year.
But that's pretty much the end of everything. And there you have it. I want to again thank Jan Ramsey for coming on to the podcast and sharing a bit about her wealth of knowledge, her career, and some knowledge on Offbeat magazine. And for Jan Ramsey, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art and culture in your neck of the woods. You just got to look for it.